My parents skipped helping me after I was publicly embarrassed at my job interview for wearing a thrift store blazer. When they asked me to cosign a loan. Months later, I said, my signature doesn't come cheap anymore. I'm Carla Mayhew. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. My parents, Ron and Deidre, are the classic Southern boomer couple, polite at church, sharp behind closed doors, and absolutely convinced that anything bad that happens to you is your own fault for not being smart enough to avoid it. I'm their only daughter, and growing up, I wasn't exactly the golden child. I wasn't bad, but I wasn't impressed. My older brother, Malcolm, went into finance and married a lawyer. Me? I studied marketing at UNC Chapel Hill, graduated with honors, but never managed to get on that fast track to success. I tried, but nothing stuck. For years after college, I lived in a tiny rental above a florist shop in downtown Asheville. Think, creaky floors, one window, and a radiator that screamed like a banshee if you turned it too high. I paid my rent by juggling freelance gigs, retail hours at a bookstore, and the occasional odd job. Every time I tried to talk to my parents about how hard it was, it felt like they saw my struggle as proof that I'd made bad choices. You picked a soft major, my dad once said. People always need accountants. They don't always need people to make logos. That was their mindset. Everything was either your fault or God testing your character. No gray area. No support, just lectures disguised as wisdom. Anyway, the turning point came last spring. I'd applied for a mid-level marketing position at a firm in Charlotte, Kellerman and Brooke. They were legit. I found out about them through a friend of a friend, and after I submitted my portfolio, I actually got called in for an in-person interview. I was over the moon. This was the kind of opportunity I'd been waiting for. There was just one problem: I had nothing to wear. I mean, I had clothes. But nothing screamed hire this confident professional woman. And buying something new was out of the question. I barely had gas money to get to Charlotte. So I went to Goodwill. It wasn't the first time. I actually take pride in my ability to make secondhand look stylish. After an hour of digging, I found a navy blazer that fit perfectly. It was lined, had sharp shoulders, and with a quick run of the iron, looked like something out of a J. Crew catalog. I paired it with gray slacks and a crisp white blouse I already had. I felt good walking into that office. That feeling lasted about 5 minutes. The hiring manager, Paige Winslow, was probably in her early 40s, the type of woman who wears minimalist jewelry and makes everything look expensive. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses and said, loud enough for the 2 other people in the room to hear, "Interesting choice of blazer. I had one just like that back in college. Bought it from a costume shop." They laughed. Not loud, but enough. I felt my stomach twist. I tried to play it off with a smile. "Vintage is making a comeback," I said. They didn't smile back. After that, it all went downhill. I fumbled my talking points, lost my rhythm, and left knowing it was a wash. I cried the whole way back to Asheville. Sat on the bed in my blazer and cried until it was dark outside. 3 days passed before I finally called my mom. I wasn't looking for a solution. I just wanted someone to say, "That terrible, I'm sorry." I told her the whole story, tried to laugh through it, but there was this long pause when I finished. "Well," she finally said, "maybe if you dressed like you took yourself seriously, they would have taken you seriously." I sat there, stunned. In the background, I heard my dad grunt, "Can't expect much when you buy your clothes out of a bin." I hung up. Didn't call again for months. I kept pushing. Applied for more jobs. Tightened my belt even more. And then, 6 months later, something finally went right. A small branding firm in Durham, Marrow and Finch, reached out after I sent them a cold pitch. Turns out the founder, Jonas Haley, had gone to UNC too and recognized my name from a student-run marketing project. We had a Zoom chat, then another. 2 weeks later, I had a full-time offer. It wasn't huge money, but it was steady. And they didn't care about where I bought my blazer. They cared about my ideas, my effort, my voice. I moved into a nicer apartment. Paid off my debt. I was okay. Not thriving, but breathing. Then, one random Tuesday night, I get a call from my mom. "Hi sweetie," she said, all warm and casual. I knew right then she wanted something. My parents don't do small talk unless there's a big ask behind it. We exchanged a few pleasantries, then she got to the point. "Well, your father and I found this lovely little property down in Beaufort. Near the water. Just a 2-bedroom cottage. We're thinking of fixing it up, making it our weekend escape." I waited. "Our credit isn't quite where it needs to be. Your father had that thing with the HELOC last year, so we were thinking. Maybe you could cosign the loan?" It was like whiplash. I couldn't believe it. Months ago, they dismissed me like a joke because I couldn't afford a full-price blazer. Now they wanted my name on a $250,000 mortgage? I took a breath. "My signature doesn't come cheap anymore," I said. Silence. Then she laughed, all airy and dismissive. "Carla, don't be dramatic. We're family." "Exactly," I said. "And when I needed a family, you mocked me. Remember that?" "That was different." "No, it wasn't," I replied. "You made me feel like garbage for trying my best with what I had. Now you want my help because I clawed my way into stability on my own?" She tried to backtrack. Said I was being too sensitive. That they didn't mean anything by it. I told her I wasn't co-signing. I wished them luck and hung up. Over the next few weeks, I thought the dust might settle. It didn't. Instead, my parents launched the guilt campaign. First, it was passive-aggressive texts. "Deidre sent me a link to a Dave Ramsey video about honoring your parents with financial support." A day later, Ron left a voicemail about how disappointing it was to see children forget where they came from. Then they brought in reinforcements. My Aunt Lorraine called one Sunday afternoon. She's the self-appointed matriarch of the extended family, always the first to get involved, even when no one asks her to. "I just don't understand, Carla," she said, after some polite small talk. "They've always done their best for you. This vacation home would be for the whole family. You could use it too." I almost laughed. As if I'd want to spend a weekend sipping sweet tea with the people who treated me like a failure until they realized I might be useful. "I appreciate that, Aunt Lorraine," I replied, "but I don't think I'm in a place to take that on right now." She pushed a little harder, hinting that I was being prideful, that God rewards those who give. I didn't take the bait. I just said, "I've got to protect what I've worked for," and left it there. They backed off, for a bit. But the whole situation left a bad taste in my mouth. I started to revisit moments I hadn't thought about in years. Like the time I was 14 and wanted to join the school play, but needed $60 for the costume fee. They told me it was a waste of money and said I could volunteer at the church food drive instead. Or the time I got a scholarship to attend a week-long summer workshop in Raleigh, and they said it would be too much driving. So I stayed home. All my life, they had placed limits on what I could want, what I could ask for. And the minute I began to taste something outside of those limits, they tried to pull me back. One Saturday morning that summer, I sat alone in my apartment, drinking coffee out of a chipped mug and staring at my old laptop screen. Work has been going well. My boss, Jonas, had even hinted at a raise by the end of the year. I was finally building something that felt solid. And yet I was drowning in anger I hadn't let myself feel for years. I started journaling. Something I hadn't done since high school. Entry after entry poured out, memories, frustrations, moments where I felt invisible, belittled, shamed. I wrote about the interview. About how small I'd felt sitting there while strangers chuckled over my blazer. About how much worse it was to come home to a mother who used that moment to remind me of all the ways she thought I was inadequate. Writing helped. But it didn't fix everything. Family has a way of getting under your skin, especially when you're raised to believe they're everything. But I was starting to see that just because someone is your parent doesn't mean they know what's best for you, or that they'll even try to understand you. The more space I gave myself, the clearer everything became. My parents weren't interested in supporting me when I needed it. But they were more than happy to benefit once I'd done the hard work. They didn't raise me to be independent, they raised me to be obedient. The problem was, I'd stopped being obedient the moment I chose a different path than the one they silently expected. And now, I was living proof that you could make it without them. Around mid-July, I got an invitation to my cousin Drew's wedding. He was marrying someone he met during his medical residency, and the entire extended family was invited to Charlotte for the weekend event. At first, I thought I'd skip it. But then I thought, maybe I should go. Not for them, for me. I rented a car, bought a new dress, yes, new, and drove to Charlotte on a hot Saturday afternoon. The wedding was beautiful, held at a vineyard just outside the city. Everyone was dressed to the nines, and for once, I didn't feel out of place. I spotted my parents during cocktail hour. Deidre was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and her usual pearls. Ron was in a terrible suit, drink in hand, looking like he was waiting for someone to validate his opinion about inflation. We made eye contact, and they both gave me tight smiles. I nodded politely, then made my way to the bar. I spent most of the evening catching up with cousins I hadn't seen in years. To my surprise, a few of them had heard about my new job. One even asked for my advice on launching her own Etsy business. It was the first time I felt like more than a cautionary tale. Later that night, Deidre found me near the restroom hallway. "You look nice tonight," she said. "Thanks," I replied. There was a pause. She looked at me like she didn't know how to approach. Maybe she didn't. "I just wanted to say," she began, "I know we haven't seen eye to eye lately. But you've done well for yourself. Your father and we just want the best for you." I nodded. I didn't say anything more. Because the truth is, they did want the best for me, as long as it looked the way they envisioned. And anything outside that mold? That was on me. We chatted a bit longer, but I kept my guard up. I'd spent too many years confusing politeness with reconciliation. Just because someone speaks softer doesn't mean they're saying something new. That weekend ended quietly. I drove home on Sunday with the windows down and my playlist on shuffle, thinking about how many versions of myself I'd had to become just to get here. From the girl with a borrowed blazer to a woman who now had the power to say no, and mean it. A few weeks after the wedding, things went quiet again. I didn't hear from Deidre or Ron, not directly anyway. My aunt forwarded me a chain email about forgiveness and healing, which I promptly archived. I wasn't looking to cut them off completely, but I also wasn't interested in rebuilding a relationship based on guilt. Work continued to go well. By late September, I had secured 2 new clients through our agency's outreach program. One of them, a small organic skincare brand out of Atlanta, specifically requested me for their campaign. That moment felt huge. For once, I wasn't chasing after validation. It came to me because of my actual work. Around this time, I started working on a little project of my own. I'd always wanted to create a resource for women in their late 20s and early 30s trying to transition out of instability into something sustainable. A lot of us weren't taught how to negotiate, how to advocate for ourselves, how to bounce back after being humiliated in a job interview for wearing the wrong blazer. So I built a small blog. Nothing flashy. Just real stories, advice from my own trial and error, and tips for branding yourself professionally without breaking the bank. I called it Threadbare Ambition. It didn't take off overnight. But slowly, women started messaging me. Some just said thank you. Others shared their own thrift store blazer stories, moments when they were dismissed because of how they looked, how they dressed, where they came from. One message, from a woman in rural Virginia, stuck with me: "Your story made me feel less alone." I thought it was just me who cried after the interviews. That hit hard. I think that's when I realized what happened to me, and how my parents reacted, wasn't just about one bad day. It was about how easy it is for people to dismiss you when they don't understand your struggle. In early October, I got a call from Malcolm, my older brother. He rarely called unless there was a family emergency or drama. "Hey," he said. "Just wanted to let you know, Mom and Dad got denied for the loan." I blinked, unsure how to respond. I hadn't even asked if they'd gone ahead with the application. "They're not too happy about it," he continued. "They think you could have helped them out of a tight spot." Of course they did. I asked if he agreed with them. He was quiet for a moment. "Not really. Look, they've been hard on you. I see that now. But they're old school. They don't really know how to say sorry, they just expect people to move on." That was the truest thing he said during that call. They'd never apologize. Not for mocking my thrift store blazer, not for implying that my financial struggles were the result of laziness or bad choices. Not for making me feel like I'd failed the family by not becoming someone they could brag about in church. And yet, somehow, they still expected me to be the safety net when their plans fell through. I told Malcolm I appreciated the heads up, and that I hoped they figured it out. A few days later, I ran into Deidre at the grocery store. It was one of those weirdly warm fall mornings where you forget it's October until you see pumpkins on every porch. I was picking up almond milk and sandwich stuff when I turned into an aisle and there she was, standing near the baking goods. We both froze for a second. "Oh," she said, blinking. I gave a small nod. "Hey." She pushed her cart forward, as if trying to figure out if we were about to do the awkward small talk thing or pretend we didn't see each other. "I heard you went to Drew's baby shower last weekend," she said. "He said you looked happy." "I am," I replied. "Work's good." "That's wonderful." She smiled a little too long, like she was trying to find her footing. There was a pause. She picked up a bag of flour, then put it back. I guess I didn't realize how far you'd come," she said. "You always were stubborn." Maybe that was a good thing. I waited for more, but that was it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an admission. But for Deidre, it was about as close as she was going to get. I just nodded again and said, "Take care, Mom." Then I walked away. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about how little she really knew me. She didn't know about Threadbare Ambition. Didn't know I was mentoring 2 younger women through a local professional network. Didn't know I'd finally saved enough to start contributing to a retirement account. And you know what? That was okay. Because the life I was building didn't need their stamp of approval. I used to believe family meant loyalty at all costs. That no matter what, you showed up. But now I think real family, chosen or blood, means showing up in the hard moments, not just when there's something to gain. About a week after the grocery store run-in, I got a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, Deidre's cursive, neat as ever, and it was sent to my apartment instead of the old address they used to keep on file. That told me one thing right away: someone had gone out of their way to find where I lived. Probably Malcolm. The envelope smelled faintly of her perfume, the one she's worn since I was a kid. I set it on the table, stared at it for a while, made myself a cup of tea, and only then did I open it. It wasn't long. "Dear Carla, I hope you're doing well. I saw you at the store and meant to say more, but I didn't know how. Your father and I talk about you often. We're glad to hear work is going well. We know we haven't always said the right things, and maybe we didn't show our support in the way you needed. That's not an excuse, just where we are. We hope you'll keep in touch. Love, Mom." No mention of the loan. No mention of the interview, or the things they said afterward. It wasn't a full apology. But again, for Deidre, this was something. I didn't write back. Not because I was trying to punish her, but because I wasn't sure what to say yet. I didn't want to pretend everything was fine. But I also didn't want to keep rehashing old wounds with people who still didn't seem to understand what they'd done wrong. Instead, I poured that emotion into my work. That month, Threadbare Ambition saw its biggest spike in traffic yet. I had written a post called "The Cost of a Cheap Blazer," and it resonated. I didn't name names, of course, but I detailed the experience, being judged in a job interview for wearing thrifted clothing, the shame of realizing your appearance might hold more weight than your resume, and the heartbreak of being dismissed by your own family afterward. I wrote about resilience, not bitterness. About what it meant to rise without cheering sections, to rebuild your confidence from the ground up. The post was shared hundreds of times. I started getting emails from people I'd never met. A former teacher in Texas. A single mom in Ohio. A woman in her late 40s who said she'd worn the same thrifted blazer to 3 interviews, and finally got hired on the 4th. One message stood out: "You wrote what I couldn't say out loud. I've been ashamed of how hard things have been. But your story made me feel less invisible. Thank you." I cried when I read it. Not out of sadness, but because for the first time, I understood the real value of what I'd gone through. That blazer? It wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of something bigger. Sometimes I think back to the day of that interview. The sharp laughter in the room. The way I tried to keep my voice from cracking. And then I think of all the women who've worn that same kind of armor, not just clothing, but dignity held together with pins and prayer, and walked into rooms where they weren't welcome. I think of them now when I write. When I consult. When I walk into a client meeting and see someone new to the table, nervous and out of place. I make it a point to ask about their ideas, not their outfit. Winter came fast that year. Work kept me busy, but the holidays loomed like they always did, complicated, with a mix of anticipation and dread. Thanksgiving was coming up, and I knew the usual invites would start rolling in soon. And sure enough, they did. First, a text from Malcolm: "Hey, Mom wants to know if you're coming for Thanksgiving. Everyone's going to be there. She said she mailed you something a while back. You get it?" Then a voicemail from Deidre herself: "Carla, honey. Just checking in. I know things have been a bit rocky between us, but we'd love to have you here for Thanksgiving. You don't have to bring anything. Just yourself." I stared at the message for a long time. There was something in her voice, not quite warmth, but maybe fatigue. Or a kind of cautious hope. I called her back 2 days later. We kept it short. I said I'd think about it. Then I called my friend Mika. Mika's been my sounding board for years. She's the kind of friend who doesn't sugarcoat things but also knows when to just listen. "I don't know, Mika," I said. "Part of me wants to go. Just to see where things are. But another part of me. I'm scared I'll be right back in that house, being 16 again. Being told I talk too loud or that I take things too personally." Mika, bless her, didn't try to sway me either way. "Do it if it's for you," she said. "Not for closure. Not to prove anything. Not because they asked. Only if it feels right." And that was the thing, I didn't know yet if it felt right. So I waited. Thanksgiving came closer. The air turned sharp, the leaves disappeared from the trees, and Asheville took on that quiet, sleepy mood it always does in late November. I still hadn't decided. The night before Thanksgiving, I found myself walking through a local bookstore, the same one I used to work at part-time when things were rough. It was nearly empty, quiet music playing overhead, and the familiar smell of paper and dust brought back memories I hadn't expected. I wandered over to the personal development section. Not because I needed advice, but because sometimes it was comforting to see how many people out there were also trying to figure themselves out. I picked up a book called Boundaries and Belonging and flipped through it. A line caught my eye: "Sometimes healing means visiting the people who hurt you, not to repair, but to remind yourself that you're no longer trapped in their story." That hit me hard. I stood there for a minute, clutching the book, thinking about that blazer, that interview, that call months later. About my parents' silence when I needed reassurance, and their sudden warmth when they needed something from me. I thought about how far I'd come. And I wondered, for the first time, not what they'd say if I showed up, but what I would say, and whether I could walk into that house without looking for their approval anymore. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, I woke up early and made coffee. I stood by the window, watching the gray-blue sky fade into morning light. Asheville was still, streets quiet, just a few early joggers and dog walkers moving about. I took a deep breath and thought, I'm going. Not for them. For me. I didn't dress up much. A soft sweater, black jeans, ankle boots. Comfortable. Warm. Confidence. Before I left, I printed out 2 things and folded them into my purse. One was a printout of the most recent feature on Threadbare Ambition, where a national women's blog had shared my story. The other was an invitation to a panel I'd been asked to speak at in January about women's resilience in the workplace. Small wins to anyone else, but to me? Proof of what I'd built. I arrived just before 2 p.m. Their house looked exactly the same: brick exterior, beige shutters, a front porch with rocking chairs no one ever used. Ron's truck was in the driveway, and Malcolm's SUV was out front. The yard was neat. Pruned bushes. Plastic pumpkin decorations. I rang the doorbell. Deidre answered, dressed in her usual Thanksgiving outfit, beige slacks and a cranberry turtleneck, gold brooch pinned high. Her eyes widened just a bit when she saw me. "Carla," she breathed. "You came." I nodded. I did. The moment was awkward, but she stepped aside quickly. Come in, come in. Everyone's in the den." The den hadn't changed in years: same floral couch, same needlepoint pillows, same family photos on the wall. But the dynamic in the room? That had shifted the moment I walked in. Ron looked up from his recliner. "Carla," he said flatly. "Hi, Dad." Malcolm got up and gave me a quick hug. My sister-in-law offered a warm smile. Even the cousins, most of them teenagers now, glanced up from their phones, curious. As I sat down, I realized something: they were watching me. All of them. Maybe because I hadn't been here in so long. Or maybe because I carried myself differently now. Dinner was fine. Deidre had made her usual dry turkey and oversweetened yams. The small talk buzzed around the table: Malcolm's new office building, one cousin's early acceptance to Duke, a neighbor who'd been acting strangely. No one brought up the loan. No one asked about my work. Until Ron, fork midair, finally said, "So, what are you doing these days? Still freelancing?" The word dripped with implication. I didn't flinch. I swallowed my sip of wine, dabbed my lips with a napkin, and calmly said, "Actually, I manage brand strategy for a boutique agency in Durham. We've doubled our client base this quarter. I also run a blog that was featured last month on Frontline Women. And I've been invited to speak on a panel in New York next year." Silence. Then Malcolm let out a low whistle. "Wow. That's impressive." Ron blinked. Deidre gave a tight smile. "Well, good for you," she said, voice neutral. I reached into my purse and slid the 2 printouts onto the table toward them. "Thought you might want to see," I said. "Since the last time we talked, you thought I was being irresponsible." Ron read the article silently. Deidre stared at the panel invite, her fingers twitching slightly. She didn't say anything, but I could tell it hit her. Not in a cruel way. Not in a way that made her hurt. But in a way that made her realize she'd misjudged me, and worse, underestimated me. I didn't need to say anything else. That was the beauty of it. After dinner, I offered to help clean up. Deidre let me dry the dishes while she washed. We worked quietly side by side. At one point, she said, "I read that article." "You wrote it?" I nodded. "You've come a long way," she said softly. I dried the last plate. "Yeah. I have." She turned toward me. Her lips parted, like she might apologize, maybe not for everything, but for something. Then she hesitated and said instead, "You should have told us. We didn't know you were doing all that." I looked her in the eye. "You didn't ask." That moment hung in the air like steam from the dishwater. And it was enough. By the time I left that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. On the way out, Ron clapped me on the shoulder, gruffly, like that was the closest he could get to saying something resembling "I'm proud of you." I got in my car, started the engine, and took one last look at the house. Same bricks. Same porch. But I wasn't the same. I drove home with the windows cracked and a smile that wouldn't go away. It wasn't just that they'd seen who I'd become, it was that I'd stopped needing them to see it. They had dismissed me once over a thrift store blazer. Now? I was building a life they didn't help shape, and could no longer control. And when they came asking for my signature, I'd told them the truth. It doesn't come cheap anymore.